You know what's funny? Everybody wants financial freedom. Everybody wants passive income. Everybody wants mailbox money, but very few people are willing to think differently enough to get it. Hey, welcome back this morning. I'm Mike Morowski, and this is the Mike Drop Show. And today we are talking about something that could completely change the way that you look at real estate investing, your financial future. Not because it's new, not because it's trendy, because it's certainly not new or trendy, but because it's working right now. While most people are just sitting on the sidelines, waiting for permission, waiting for everything to be okay, waiting for mainstream media to say things are back to normal, they're missing out. Here's what I mean. There's investors today that are building wealth in this market. Not 5 years ago, not when rates were at historic lows. It's easy then. When the wind is at your back and rates are low and operations are easy and going well, it's easy. But when it's tough and you work through the tough times, that's when you really get to progress and really start to see where the differences lay. Not when banks are throwing money around like candy. I've been in markets like that. I've been in markets where, you know, banks threw money at you. You were able to leverage at 85, 80% LTV. And, that kind of stuff is just crazy. That's what causes deals to go sideways and equity to blow up. You know, when banks are throwing money at you like candy, anybody can get a loan, anybody can get a deal done, anybody can raise capital because everybody's in. Not now though. People are sitting on the sidelines. you know Everybody's complaining today, everybody's waiting, everybody's saying that, the headlines are saying that it's bad, and that, the war, and everything else that's going on. You know what? You're just convincing yourself, or trying to convince yourself, that, sitting on the sidelines is right, or sitting on the sidelines is something that, just because everybody else is doing it, it's okay for you. You know what? It's not okay for you. I've learned over decades in this business that the biggest opportunities almost never show up when everybody feels comfortable. They show up when people are nervous. They show up when people are uncertain. They show up when the crowd is standing still. And that's exactly where we are today. I've said over and over again that I've made money in markets that were robust, in markets that were broken, when interest rates were high, when interest rates were low, whether there was a Republican in office, whether there was a Democrat in office, it doesn't make difference. Where the difference lies is in how you look at deals, how you look at opportunities. So if you're wondering whether this market is still worth paying attention to, you know, how long are you going to wonder before you come off the sidelines? It's not going to kill you. It's a big joke these days, is that little expression. It didn't kill me, but it's not going to kill you to come off the sidelines, to jump back in and to play. If you've been wondering whether passive investing still works, well, it does. Just because there's been some deals that have gone sideways, just because some distributions have stopped, because there's been capital calls, that doesn't mean that it's over, that it's done. It just means that it's a new beginning. And new beginnings are where you get started. I think right now we're going to see the biggest transfer of wealth that we've seen in decades. So if you've been wondering how investors are still buying deals when financing seems harder than ever to get, stay with me, because we're going to have some real conversation today. And I promise you this: the people who understand what's happening right now are going to look back on a couple of years from now, and they're going to look very differently at today and say, either I should have, or I'm glad I did. So who are you going to be, or who are you? Let's start here and I love this show because I get to be really candid and I get to be really straightforward and, tell you just like it is. But let's start here because this one drives me crazy. I hear people say all the time, "Hey, Mike, I'm waiting for the market to improve." Really? What are you waiting for the market? What part of the market are you waiting to improve? You know, I was with Karen Hall last night from UDirect, and she spoke at our investor meetup in Las Vegas. And what was really interesting was she used to be a loan officer before she started UDirect, and she said people would make a decision to change lenders because of a 1/4% interest rate. A 1/4% typically means about $10 a month. I mean, in the residential realm. So you know, when people say I'm going to wait for the market to improve, for interest rates to get better, for unemployment to get better, for the CDP to go up, uh, you know, really, why? What exactly does that mean? Waiting for prices to go back up, waiting for gas to come down, waiting for rates to come down, waiting until the headlines feel positive because because if that's your strategy, I got bad news for you. By the time the headlines tell you that everything is okay, the opportunity is already gone by. I think if you wait right now for the mainstream media to say, hey, things are better, the market has changed, unemployment's better, interest rates are better, real estate is selling more, you're going to miss 18 to 24 months of the best part of the market. You know, you ever sit in a restaurant and you get a steak, your steak comes out to you and you take a bite, that first bite of it, and it's like so good. And by the time you get to the end, it's not as warm as it was when you got it. That's kind of the opportunity here that you're going to see happen. But, the crowd's always showing up late. Are you going to be part of the crowd or are you going to do something different? I know growing up, my mom used to always say, hey, if your friends jumped off a bridge, are you going to follow them? But maybe you're the first one that should jump off the bridge today. The crowd buys at the top, but if you're not going to be part of the crowd, then buy at the bottom and take part in the run up. The crowd feels safe when the risk is already behind them. You know, we see it. We see it in stocks. We see it in crypto. We see it in real estate. We see it in gas and oil, and we're seeing it again right now. People who create wealth don't wait for certainty. They position themselves before certainty ever arrives. That's what separates investors from spectators. So let me ask you, are you a spectator or are you an investor? Because, if you follow a Warren Buffett mentality, he's saying that right now's the time, right? He's evaluating, he's looking, he's buying. And the reason for that is because he knows that the beginning of the cycle is where the best flavor in the meat is. Now, whenever people hear creative financing, some of them immediately think it sounds complicated or risky or maybe even a little shady. The first time somebody told me I could buy a deal with little or no money down, I thought, oh my God, that's shady you know but it's none of those things. I've bought hundreds, maybe thousands of units over the years creatively, little money down, no money down, solving other people's problems, right? Because when you buy deals like that, what you're ultimately doing is you're solving a problem for somebody else. So let me ask you something. What does everybody assume a bank why does everybody assume that a bank has to be involved in every transaction? Who made that rule up? Seriously, think about it. There's people out there today that say, hey, they will never buy a traditional deal again. They will never get bank financing again. That the only thing they'll ever do is do a creative deal. You know, if that's something that you want, then I have a solution for you. Yeah. Why do people need somebody else sitting in the middle telling us whether or not we can make a deal? I have a lot of comments around that. Why do other people need to be involved in your activity and your actions? Because we don't. Some of the best deals out there I've ever seen happen because somebody was willing to have a conversation that nobody else was willing to have. So if you're somebody who is open to a new conversation, if you're somebody who is willing to have a different conversation with a seller, with a buyer, while everyone else is saying, "Oh, I can't get a deal done. I can't get approved. The rates are too high." You know, uh, real successful investors are asking, "Why does the seller act? What does the seller actually need?" Those are completely different conversations and they produce completely different results. So are you somebody looking to produce different results today? Most sellers don't actually want to sell, or most sellers don't actually want to sell real estate. They're trying to solve a problem, and that's the secret. Whether they're trying to move cross town, cross country, out of the country, whether they had medical issues, job issues, they're retiring, they're tired, they have problems with partners. You know, the property is just part of the equation and solving the problem. The problem is the real issue. So how do we find out what the problem is, and how do we understand that? It's through questions. I get you know commented a lot that I ask a lot of questions. And I do, because I think that you have to have all the information and all the facts. It's just like if you're on a sales call with someone and, how do you know what they need or how you can solve their problem unless you ask enough questions? It's the same thing with buying real estate. You know, the more questions you ask of the seller, and the right questions, they can't just be any questions, right? But the more questions you ask, the better answers you get. When you have better answers, then you have the ability to solve that problem. So you're creating options for yourself, for the seller, and options create opportunities. And that's what this is about, is creating opportunities. So I know some people don't want to hear this because, fear sells, right? Everything mainstream media is saying, everything all the gurus are saying, that fear sells. And if things are bad and people are buying into that, then they're going to sit on the sidelines and stay stuck. It's amazing to me how the industry has thinned out over the last 20 months. Fear gets views, fear gets attention, but fear also gets opportunity. So let's be honest, the easy money era is over. And thank goodness for that, because now you can see who's left. It's like Warren Buffett says, and I love this, you really see who is serious when the tide goes out and who's left swimming naked, right? you know, and thank goodness for that, because easy money made a lot of people lazy. Deals didn't have to be great. Operators didn't have to be disciplined. People assumed everything would go up forever. That's the problem in a rising market. But that's not investing. That's momentum. Now, you want to catch a little momentum, right? But you also want to be cautious along the way. Now we're getting back to fundamentals right now. And that's where we're at, is fundamentals. You got to have basic skills. You've got to know real operators are creating value. And that's exciting when you get to see that. So let's switch gears for a minute, because I know a lot of people are listening and thinking, Mike, I don't want another job. Good. I don't want you to have another job either. You shouldn't. I meet doctors making a $500,000 a year, business owners making millions, executives running huge companies, business owners that have exited companies for hundreds of millions of dollars. They don't need another job either. What they need is ownership, and they need tax advantages, and they need financial planning. That's a big difference. Ownership changes everything. Ownership is where wealth gets built and doubled and tripled in some cases. And that's why passive investing has exploded. People finally realize that they don't have to swing the hammer. They don't have to answer tenant calls, contractor calls. They don't have to be property managers. They don't have to be an operator. It's a game changer for them. So let me ask you something. In your income, if your income stopped today, so let me start there. If your income stopped today, how long could your lifestyle survive? A month, 3 months, 6 months? You know, it's not a comfortable question, is it? But it's a really important one because, too many people have built lives around earned income, not asset income. And the wealthiest people I know don't obsess over paychecks. They obsess over ownership and the what that ownership gives them. So if you're an owner of apartments and you have the opportunity to capitalize on those, you're creating a machine that keeps working for you over and over again. So now that's the part I really wanted you to hear. Now, the next great opportunity isn't coming, it's already starting. It's here right now. There's real apartment owner facing loan maturities. There's operators that are under pressure. There's operators who've made assumptions that didn't work out. And there's deals that look great in 21 that look very different today. And every single market cycle does the same thing. And here we are at the beginning of that market cycle. So ownership changes everything, wealth transfers from people to people, from groups to groups. And that's what we do. The question is, will you recognize that it's happening right now? Or are you going to read about it in 3 years and say, darn it, he was right? Smart money isn't panicking. They're studying the market, they're preparing, they're building relationships. Smart money's looking for opportunities and asking questions. So are you going to be part of that rise? Because in uncertainty, that's where discounts happen and opportunities emerge. That's where the future stories get written. So, are we going to work on writing your future story today? Or are we going to work on just enhancing the story that you're living right now? If there's one thing I hope you take away from today's conversation, it's this: stop waiting. Stop trying to time the market. Stop trying for perfect conditions or permission. The people who create extraordinary results aren't fearless. They're decisive. They move while others hesitate. So stop complaining and position yourself where you need to be. Not because it's easy, but because it's different, and different creates opportunity. So if today's conversation got you thinking, at least got you thinking, maybe not off the sidelines yet, but wondering if this wealth transfer could what it could actually look like, then I personally want to invite you to a special webinar that I'm doing. Why the next 24 months could create one of the greatest apartment buying opportunities in over a decade. It's called the multifamily wealth transfer. So June 4th at 5 p.m. Central Time, I am hosting a webinar that's going to talk about the greatest buying opportunities in over a decade. We're going to take a hard look at what's happening inside multifamily. No hype, no sensational headlines, just real conversation. And then on June 11th, I'm hosting another powerful panel discussion, my Smart Money Moves series, Unlocking the Next Wealth Wave of Passive Investing, June 11th at 5 p.m. Central. So this is for everyone who wants to better understand passive investing, evaluating opportunities, and more effectively avoid costly mistakes. So whether you're brand new or you're already investing, you're going to walk away with practical insights you actually use. The future belongs to investors who understand it, who get it, who are making changes. And I hope you'll join us. So until next time, keep growing, keep building a life you design or a life you deserve by design and not by default. So if you're interested in either one of those events coming up, drop a comment, send us a DM. We'll get you the information right away. Watch your email, watch your social media because we're posting it out there. So I hope to see you on the 4th or at the 11th, or better yet, at both, because I want to help you make changes that you deserve. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you next week.